Hello, biology. This is Mrs. Kozian. This is your last set of videos for Unit 1. Woo! You guys, please title this Video 4 Characteristics of Life and Organization of Living Things. So, this is your last video. Awesome. You guys have done a great job so far. Okay, so let's start with a process called homeostasis. Now, I'm sure you heard this in maybe middle school, maybe even elementary school. You were first introduced to this vocab word. It's the process that all living things go through to maintain an internal balance. An example of ones that we do in our body almost every single day would be when it gets hot, our body temperature goes up, so we are off from our normal state. So we sweat in order to cool down, so in order to bring ourselves back to that normal temperature. Now, if it gets a little bit too cold and our temperature drops, we shiver or our muscles involuntarily contract in order to bring our temperature up to get it right back to that normal 98.6 that we have. So that's one process that all living things go through called homeostasis. I wanted to start with that one because everything else around it, the rest of basically the rest of our year revolves around the idea of maintaining this process of homeostasis. Okay, now there are two ways that we maintain homeostasis. The first one is called short-term equilibrium. Now this is something that fixes it in the short term. It doesn't fix it forever. Examples again would be sweating and shivering. So it gets hot, you sweat, and your temperature decreases. It doesn't fix your temperature permanently. It fixes it for the short term. You still might sweat again at some point in time. Shivering would do the same thing. It doesn't fix our temperature forever. It's a short-term adjustment because we as living things are always moving. So we need to be able to adjust to our environments as they change. Well, I guess all living things don't move, but all living things are exposed to different parts of the environment, changes in the environment. So we need to be able to adjust to those changes quickly and in the short term. Now, long-term equilibrium is a little bit trickier. Long-term equilibrium is finding a solution to maintain homeostasis over a long period of time. An example would be a tree grows roots toward a source of water. That helps to increase the tree's chances of surviving and maintaining its water level for a long time. It doesn't fix the problem permanently if there's some type of a water shortage or something like that. It doesn't fix it permanently. Neither one of these equilibriums fixes it permanently. But long-term equilibrium would hopefully maintain homeostasis for a longer span of time. Now, stimulus response. This is how we end up shivering or sweating or growing roots towards a body of water. A stimulus is something that comes in and affects our bodies from the outside, and then how we respond to that is called the stimulus response. So, for example, you have a stimulus where your hand touches a hot stove. You respond to that by quickly pulling that hand away. Stimulus response. There are a lot of different examples about this that we will talk about in class, but basically any outside event that causes your body to respond is part of the stimulus response. Okay, now you guys need to write down all 8 of these. These are the 8 characteristics of all living things. This includes bacteria, plants, humans, animals, fish, snakes, fungi, starfish, anything that on this planet that we consider alive fall into these 8 they have these 8 characteristics. The first one is that all living things have cells. They can either be unicellular, which means they only have one cell, like a bacteria, or they can be multicellular, have more than one cell. As humans, we are multicellular. Make sure you write down both of those definitions. Response to stimuli. All living things respond to outside stimuli. As humans, it might be something like running from a rabid bear as it chases us down the street. We might run the other way. Or pulling our hand away from a hot stove is a little more common. Even plants respond to stimuli. If you've ever seen a plant that grows toward light, that is a way that plants respond to stimuli. Flowers will close themselves during the hottest part of the day in order to conserve water. That's another response to stimuli. So response to stimuli does not need to be a quick movement. It can be something small or slow. Maintaining homeostasis, number 3. All living things, in their response to stimuli, attempt to maintain an internal balance or homeostasis. One of the ways that they do that is metabolism, or taking in and breaking down materials. Metabolism does not mean that a living thing has to eat the way that humans eat. For example, plants can't just head through the drive-through and grab a Big Mac, but they can metabolize things like water and CO2 through the process of photosynthesis to make glucose and oxygen. So metabolism is just taking in materials and processing them. Growth and development. All living things grow and they develop or change over time. For example, human beings are born, and not only do they grow larger, they also develop into, we have a different shape as we grow and develop. We don't stay the same sort of shape and proportions that we had as children. A great example of this one to help you remember would be that a tadpole turns into a frog. Not only does it grow larger, but it develops into an adult. Reproduction, all living things reproduce. There are 2 types of reproduction, sexual and asexual. Write them both down. Sexual requires a male and a female, 2 genders to reproduce. Asexual requires only one individual, and basically, to sum it up, it would just make a copy of itself. Great example of asexual reproduction would be bacteria. They very often will just split. They'll reproduce the information inside of their cell, split to make a new bacteria. 7, living things evolve or change over time. This does not mean that one organism evolves and changes into something different over its lifetime. It means that a species evolves or changes over time. So one species of bacteria may be different from one generation to the next, but they not changing in its lifetime. Okay, one species of bird may evolve over hundreds of thousands or millions of years, but we're not talking about in one individual's lifetime. We're talking about over long periods of time. And last one, all living things have DNA. That is where all living things store their genetic information. From the smallest bacteria up to the largest blue whale, all living things have these 8 magical characteristics. You need to make sure you know all of them for your quiz on Wednesday. So now that we know that living things grow and develop over time and that they're all made out of cells, we have to figure out how do we get so many different types of cells, and that process is called cell specialization. So as you were first fertilized, when you were just a young embryo, you guys, not all of your cells were already decided. You may have had what we call stem cells. It's just a really general sort of idea that our cells were not, they didn't have jobs yet. And so as we grow and develop, our cells take on different jobs. So you might have some cells that turn into brain cells, some turn into liver cells, some turn into skin cells. And the DNA that we have helps us to make those decisions, well, we don't get to make them, but helps our cells to make the decision as to what job they're supposed to have. So for example, as a frog goes from a tadpole to an adult frog, it has DNA or information in its cells that tell it the cells perhaps that it uses in its tail to stop developing a tail and to start developing legs. So it's called cell specialization. Our DNA tells our cells where to go and what to do. Okay, levels of organization. All living things fall into these levels of organization. Now you guys learned atom and molecule, especially when you talked in physics and chemistry. Now those parts come together to make what we call organelles. These are the small parts of a cell that by themselves are not living, but they come together to make a cell. So we start here. Living things are organized starting at a cell. A cell is the smallest unit of living things that can be considered alive. It can live on its own. Many bacteria are made out of just one cell. Remember, we call that unicellular. Now, when we put groups of cells together, groups of cells that, remember, through cell specialization have the same job, we can make tissues. If I have a brain cell, that can make brain tissue. And when I put groups of tissues together, I make organs. So brain cell makes brain tissue, makes a brain. Now when I put similar organs together, I get organ systems, okay? Brain cell, brain tissue, brain, part of the nervous system. And that makes up, when you put organ systems together, that makes up an organism, or one living thing, okay? You are an organism. Let's say, a deer. A deer is one living organism. When we put a group of the same species of the same type of living organism together, it's called a population. So a group of deer in one area, we'd have a herd of deer. When we put multiple groups of living things together, so say a herd of deer, a flock of birds, a field of grass, that makes up a community. All living parts of an ecosystem, only the living parts. When we put communities together, we get ecosystems. When we put ecosystems together, we get the biosphere, or Earth. You guys need to make sure you write down all these levels. You will need to know cell through biosphere. If it helps, you could try to write down your own examples, starting from cell all the way up to biosphere, and then I could check them in class. And that is the last slide of your last set of notes for Unit 1. Remember, you will have a quiz over characteristics of living things, including these levels of organization and these characteristics of living things. So make sure you really study that information. All right, guys, good job.